Welcome friends. In this video, we are going to see top 50 annotation of the Spring Boot application. It's become crucial when you go experience a developer with interviews. Interviewer ask you the question like, can you list out few annotation used in your project? So you at that time you will end up explaining like at the rate service, at the rate controller, these 3 to 4 annotation. But in this video tutorial, we are going to see in-depth knowledge about Spring Boot annotations that we are, let's understand this. So core annotation, I have categorized each annotation into the different categories. For example, here, this I have a web annotation, core annotations, or you can see stereotype annotation. So we are going to see one by one. Let's first understand what is a core annotation. So core annotation, it is a Spring Boot application at the rate Spring Boot applications. So this annotation consists of 3 annotation, that is at the rate configuration, at the rate enable auto configuration, and component scan. And this annotation is foundation of Spring Boot application, enabling auto configuration, component scanning, and configuration management. So in depth, we will understand this, what is at the rate auto configuration. At the rate auto configuration indicate that the class can be used by the Spring IOC container as a source of the bin definitions. Means if we mention any annotation over this our class, that class will be defined as a source of bin. Means that class will be considered as a bin for Spring IOC. This annotation marks classes that define beans, which are the building block of Spring applications. Means once we define this over our class level, that class will be marked as a beans, and that bean is a building block of our Spring annotations. Then next is component scan. Configuring component scanning directives with use configuration classes. This annotation tells Spring to scan the component classes annotated with at the rate component, at the rate service, at the rate repository. Means this will scan this annotation in our applications. And this will also enables us in we can like mention packages in that sub packages, and inside packages it will scan all the bins available in Spring applications. Then at the rate enable auto configuration, this will enable Spring Boot auto configuration mechanism. This annotation instructs Spring Boot to automatically configure Spring bins based on dependency present in the project, simplifying application setup. Means what it will do, it will enable the Spring Boot auto configuration. Means suppose we have added any dependencies. Let's suppose we have added a Spring Boot starter. In that case, it will automatically configure embedded server in our applications. And then next we are going to see web annotation. REST controller. When we are working with microservice based architecture, this becomes crucial at the REST controller. And this REST controller is a combination of at the rate controller and response body. This annotation marked as a REST controller responsible for handling web requests and returning data to the specific format. Means it will return data in the JSON format to the end user, or we can configure this making at the rate enable sorry at the rate at like at the rate REST controller, we can make it at the controller class level. Let's see one example for this. Previously we have seen this at the rate Spring Boot annotations. If we go inside this, there we will get this at the rate Spring Boot and auto configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan. And when we use at the rate REST controller, we can use that on controller level. Here, if you see, this is my controller, employee controller I have created, and over that I have used this Spring at the rate REST controller annotations. Then next controller, when we work with web application, MVC based web application, in that case, we can go with at the rate controller annotation. This annotation is used for traditional MVC controller that handle the web requests. When we use at the rate controller, when we develop application with Spring MVC. When we use REST controller, whenever our responsible for handling web requests and returning specific data, means when we go with microservice based architecture, in that case For handling web requests, we can use REST controller. Then request mapping provide routing information. So this specify the URL to be mapped. This is the annotation map in specific URL to control method, enabling the handling of incoming requests. Let's understand with example. Here if you see this request mapping is given, and if whenever we want to maintain versioning, then suppose same API have two different versions. So in that case, we can use request mapping, and we can map here. Similarly, version 1, then we can, for the second API, we can provide version 2. Like this, request mapping will work, as well as it will provide routing information. So it will go and it will call this. If we hit in one endpoint, which is create API post mapping, then it will directly, based on this mapping, this will call this method. So it will provide routing information to our Spring Boot applications. And next is controller request mapping we have. Then here if we see get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, delete mapping, patch mapping. So this is the request mapping annotation, and it handles different HTTP method. This annotation provide more concise way to map specific HTTP method to the controller method, improving code reliability. So this will provide code readability, and we can use this to get data from database, post something we want to save data from the database, or something we need to update from the database. At that case, we can use this put mapping. Then delete mapping. Suppose we want to delete any request in the record from the database. In that case, we can use this delete mapping. Here I use post mapping on my, when I am creating my employee, I have used post mapping. Whenever I want to get data, I have used get mapping. Whenever I want to get data by ID, then that time I will use get mapping, then put mapping. So for update, I have used this put mapping. Then for delete, I have used this delete mapping. And next, we will see request param binds a web request parameter to the method parameters. So what it will do? Request param, we suppose we want to send any parameter as a request. In that case, we can use request param annotations. Then next path variable. Path variable, what it will do? Binds URL template variable to the method parameter. This annotation is used to extract value from the URL path and map them to method parameter, enabling dynamic routing. So for example, here I have used this path variable, which we are sending as ID, and this ID will map to the our URL by dynamic handlings. Then next, we will use request body. This request body, what it will do? Request body bind of the request web request to a method parameter. Here I have used this annotation as well. Here request body is given, and we have passed this employee as a request body to this method. So what it will do? A request body annotation is a web request to method parameter. This annotation allow to receive data sent in the body. So this will allow you to receive data sent in the body of the web request and map it to the method parameter. It will map to the method parameter typically used for JSON or XML. Just I have shown this. Then response body bind the return value of method to the web response body. It will, what it will do? Bind the return value method of the web request response body. This annotation instructs Spring to return the result and controller method directly to the response body. Often use for REST API. Mostly we use with this REST API. Then cross origin is there. When we use cross origin, just a second. Cross origin, enable cross origin requests or specific method or class. This annotation allow web application from different domain to interact with each other, addressing security concern related to cross origin requests. Means we want to different domain to communicate. For example, I want my Spring Boot application to connect with my Angular. In that case, I will use this cross origin, and I will mention the URL of my Spring Boot application inside my Angular application inside Spring Boot, or vice versa. Then Next is the stereotype annotations here. First is a component scan service service repository. What it will do, this annotation mark classes as a components which are reusable building block of Spring applications. It will mark classes as a components. Means if we write any class, that it will mark as a the component which is are reusable building block of Spring application. In general purpose annotation for any class that you want to manage by the Spring container. It is a any class whenever we want to act as a bin. In that case, I can use this component. Then service, it is a specialization of component component indicating that class holds business logic. Whenever we develop any business logics in our application. For example, here I have created one service class, and in that I have used this written some business logic, and for that to act as this class as a beans, I have used service. So Spring IOC will consider this as a service bin. Then this annotation mark classes that implement business logic, making it clear that they are responsible for specific functionality within the application. Then repository specialization of a component indicating that class provide mechanism for storing, retrieval, update, and delete operation on object. So whenever we interact with databases, at that time we will use this repository annotation. There is several operation we can perform with the help of this. This annotation provides some methods, predefined method available in the API repositories. This annotation mark classes that interact with the data sources, providing clear separation of concern for data access logic. So it will, whenever we want to data access, in that case, we can use this repository repository. Then dependency injection annotations to add. Whenever suppose setter method, we can make a constructor feed setter method or configuring method to be auto add by Spring by making this using auto add dependency injection. This annotation instructs Spring to automatically inject dependency into a class, simplifying the process of managing dependencies. Means it will inject the dependent object into the target objects. Then qualifier specifies which bin should be auto-add when multiple bin of the same type exists. Suppose same type of bin exists. In that case, this annotation help to resolve ambiguity when multiple bin of the same type are available, allowing you to explicitly specify which bin should be injected. So that is the use of our Then next annotation is primary. Indicate that the particular bin should be given preference when multiple bin are candidate of for auto wiring. This annotation mark bin as the primary candidate for auto wiring. Make it the default choice when multiple bin of the same type are available. So this here the difference should be clear here. First qualifier and then primary. It's looks similar, but here what is the difference? This specifies which bin should be auto-add when multiple bin of the same type exists, and this will primary will what it indicate that particular bin should be given preference when multiple bin are candidates for auto-wiring. Means multiple bins are whenever they are candidate for auto wiring, this we can make them making uh, primary, so that that candidate should be become eligible for that this Spring IOC containers. Then next is the scope. Configure the scope of the bin, singleton, prototype, requests, and sessions. And this annotation define the life cycle and visibility of the bin within the Spring container, controlling how it is created and accessed. So there is a scopes in Spring Beans, means request per scope. How many requests? Like singleton, only one object is created. Prototype, multiple object is created. Request means only one per request is created, and session means throughout the application bin is created. This is the scope annotation configure the scope of the bins. Based on we can write this at the rate scope annotations. Then next here entity. These are the basic annotation we use while interacting with the database. Uh, for example, at the rate entity, at the rate table. Suppose any class we want to make as a entity and represent as a entity, that we can mark that as a at the rate entity, and we can write the table name with the corresponding entity, making at the rate table annotations. And this ID specify the primary key of an entity. This annotation mark of field has the primary key of the entity, which uniquely identify each record in database tables. So once we write this over column name, that will mark uniquely identify and each record in the database table. Let's see this example for this. Here I have created one entity class. In that I have written this all the annotations. Suppose here I will take employee, and if you see, we can write at the rate entity or employee class or table, and over column name we can write at the rate ID annotations. That is the use case for these three. And generated value, it specifies the generation strategy for the primary key. This annotation define how the primary key value are generated, such as using auto increment values or UIDs. Means this will it will generate I value based on the auto incrementing values. Here I have written this like strategy. We can write generation type, identity, or here different we can use like auto sequence UID table. These are the type of there. So we can use this strategy annotation to add the rate generated values. Then at the rate column, this will map specific column to the database. Specify the map column for the persistent property or feed. This annotation map the feed in entity class to specific column in the database table. For example, this is the table in my this is the table in my sorry, this is the column in my database table name. So I will mark it as at the rate column, and we can name the we can add the name of the column. But here I have not written because I am using Spring Data JPA. So Spring Data JPA that this is not we can mention as well as we cannot mention. We will discuss this in further videos. What is Spring Data JPA? This is the important concept. I will create separate video on this Data JPA. So subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned. We will see upcoming videos. And then next is column we have seen one to one, many, one to many, many to one. This annotation when we use one to one, suppose request we need to any column we need to map. In that case, we can go with this annotation. So we can define different type of relationship between entities, allowing you to model complex data and structure and relationship in a database. So here, if you see, I have used one-to-one over address. So one customer can have one address, as well as one customer can have many departments, or many departments can have many students. So for that, I use this many to many annotations. For this as well, we will see we will create separate videos on annotations, one to one, one to many to many. So stay updated, guys. Then next we will see at the rate transactional. So indicate that annotated method or class should be executed within the transaction context. This annotation ensures that the series of database operation are treated as a single unit, guaranteeing data consistency and integrity. Means we are when we use this and at the rate transactional annotation, it will suppose we make any transaction in the database level. If there is transaction failure, it will not commit the our data into the database. And whenever it is success, in that case we can so for the smooth transaction we can use this at the rate transaction. It will guarantee data consistency and integrity while performing database operations. Let's understand next here. Next is some validation annotation. So we can use this to validate parameters in our like members. Mark bean method parameter or method return type for validation. This annotation trigger for validation process for specify object or method parameter, ensuring that data meets predefined constraints. Means for the validation purpose, we can use this. Then at the rate not null, mean, max, size, pattern, etc. This is bean validation annotation used to specify constraint on fields. We can use this on the fields. Suppose this field I don't want to be not null. Email dot I don't want to be not null. So in that case, I will use this not null annotation over here. At the rate not null. So it will give us not null values for this. So it will validate this while we are sending request to the our database. Similarly, this mean max we can use. Suppose I want mobile number mean like minimum and maximum number. In that case, we can specify this mean and max as well. And then next security annotation we can use at the rate secure. This is the specified list of security roles that allow to access method. And this annotation restrict access to the method based on the roles assigned to the user, ensuring that only authorized users can execute specific operations. And so this we can use for security purpose. Then pre-authorized, post-authorized is there. Method level security annotation that allows specifying access control expression. So this is the method level annotation we can use pre-authorized, post-authorized whenever we want to make any method as authorized. Then this annotation provides the fine-grained control over method access, allowing you to define complex authorization rule based on user roles, permission, or other condition. In the Spring security, there is suppose we want to rule-based access. In that case, we can go with this pre-authorized and post-authorized annotations. Then role allows, at the rate role allows. So this specifies security role permitted to access the method. So what it will do, it will specify that these are the roles permitted to the method. Then next is miscellaneous annotations. So at the rate bean, suppose we want to mark any class as a bean. So Spring container will configure that class as a bean with the help of at the rate bean annotation. Then at the rate profile, at the rate conditional, and the rate event listener and order. So profiles will indicate that component is eligible for registration. So when a specified profile is active. Then this conditional specify that bean is only eligible for registration when specified condition is met. So this miscellaneous annotation we can use over Spring. And event listeners. So this method listen for the application event. This annotation allow you to define method that are executed when specific event occur within the specific application. Means any specific event occur within the specific application. In that time, to enable event driven programming, we can use this event listeners. Then orders. So it specifies the order of execution for beans or event listeners. What it will do, it will specify the execution of beans or event listener. This annotation defines the order in which beans are initialized or event listener are invoked. Means where how are the events are invoked, means called, that we can specify with the at the rate order annotation, allowing you to control execution sequence of different components. This will allow us the sequence of execution of our components. That's all from this video, guys. I hope if you specify few annotation from this as well, so interview will be satisfied with your answers. uh, I hope you gain some knowledge from this video. Thanks for watching this video, guys. We'll see you in next videos.